Hi everyone, it's Donna here from Succeed with Dyslexia, and it's great to have your company for this conversation. It's a really important conversation, actually, all around mental health and well-being. And today we're going to do a deep dive into assessment and identification of dyslexia, because I think we all realise understanding who you are, it plays a vital role, doesn't it, in ensuring that we've got great well-being and a good, healthy mental health approach, I guess is the word. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest today, and it's Katrina Cochrane. Katrina is a specialist teacher, an assessor, an author. She has been Director of Education at the British Dyslexia Association, so she is more than qualified to take us through this conversation. So, Katrina, hi, thank you so
Hello.
much for joining us. And yes, this is a really important conversation,
Yeah,
actually, isn't it? All about assessment
yeah.
and the role it plays in engendering great mental health and well-being amongst children and adults, actually. So before we get started, I've told our listeners a little bit about you, but there's so much to go through. Katrina, can you set the scene for us about, how you got started in the world of dyslexia and a little bit about, your journey so far?
Well, I mean, Donnie, you know this story about the fact that I went into teaching quite late and went into my first school, and I've been taught nothing about dyslexia on my PGCE. So all of a sudden, I had all of these children coming to me who had dyslexic difficulties, and there was just nothing I could do. I had no tools to be able to support them. My head of education, my head of year would just say, "Oh, just give them the coloured overlay. Didn't matter what colour it was, just give them a colour." And I thought, well, I need to go back and just have a look at this in a bit more detail. So I went back and did the one of the accredited courses and qualified as a specialist teacher and assessor, and actually then subsequently found out that my own son was dyslexic. So it did all start falling into place, and I was able to help him eventually. And worked for Dyslexia Action for I think 14 years, and then went to British Dyslexia Association. So I've done a lot of assessing of both children and adults. I do a lot of work still with the accreditation board of the BDA, looking at those courses and the accreditation of them. I'm still fascinated by assessment and getting to the bottom of these difficulties these children and adults have. And it's very interesting seeing the difference between the children's attitude to an assessment and an adult's attitude to an assessment. Certainly for a child, they take it all in their stride, don't they? It's something that they see as perhaps they've got a few difficulties. They're interested in the whole procedure, but it's, okay, if they've got difficulties, then it's for you to sort out. They haven't had time to really process the impact of those difficulties on them. And if we can get it early enough and assess them early enough, then they haven't got the problems with self-esteem. They haven't got the problems with motivation. But when I start assessing adults who've had years of trying to hide their dyslexia, it's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
It's fascinating, Katrina. And obviously, like I said in the introduction, you're so well placed to talk about this issue. And I think with COVID and so on, it's really had an impact on children and adults
yeah,
getting assessed. And we'll talk about that during our time together today, I think. I suppose where we're at, I mean, you've talked about your rich heritage in the UK, and I know that, you've got a great reputation. You're a consummate professional, a real guru around assessment and so on here in the UK. And we know we've got international listeners. So we're going to talk about what happens in the
yeah,
UK, but we
yeah,
hope we inspire others
yeah,
across
yeah,
the world, really, to listen to some of the great practice, really,
yeah,
what we all should aspire to be, and inspire them to celebrate their own great practice, I guess. So,
yeah.
just for those who aren't sure, could you give us a quick overview of the types of assessment that somebody like you
Yes,
would be
yeah.
working with children and adults around?
And certainly the other thing is that all of the tests that I use, generally, about 90% of the tests that I use are American anyway. So it's very similar across the world, the diagnostic assessment. But there are lots of different ways into finding out about whether or not someone is dyslexic or not. We start with checklists. We've got some commercial screeners. For adults, we've got workplace needs assessments where we look at the technology that somebody might need to do their job properly. So not everybody needs a full diagnostic assessment, and certainly people who come to me, they contact me with a query. I go through quite a process with them to find out exactly what they need. These are not cheap. Lots of times grandparents have paid for them. Parents have been saving up for a long time for them. So I want to make sure that they're really using their money properly. And for some, I say, no, use your money for some teaching, for some tuition, because having that label isn't going to help you specifically now. You don't need to spend the money now. For others, like students, getting disabled students allowance, which in the UK is brilliant, and it's a real passport to technology support, even things like extended library loans, things like that. It's really worth having that diagnostic assessment report to trigger that additional support in university. Although I must say, universities are pretty good. They're very well funded and do support students very, very well. Better than schools, actually.
It's fascinating, the different aspects of assessment then, isn't it? So from your experiences then, Katrina, as I say, we're talking a lot in this campaign around mental health, and you've spoken very eloquently there about the importance of early identification, but obviously for some adults that hasn't happened yet, and it's not happened for whatever reason in their childhood. But would you be able to talk for a little bit about what happens with when you're going to identify a child, and in connection to, mental health and the impact it has on themselves and their families as well, I guess?
I think with any kind of assessment I do, it's getting as much information as possible, and I get as much information from parents. I get it from school. Interestingly, sometimes the information from the school doesn't match up with the parents, what they discuss about the child. So the parents will know that there is dyslexia in the family. They have seen it in their child. They've observed it during lockdown, the way in which they've been trying to work. And the school will say, oh, no, we're not even on our radar. And so, you've got this mismatch often of how the school perceives the child and how the parents perceive the child.
And with that battle, sorry to interrupt, but just what you said there is fascinating. So with that mismatch of opinions and so on, I'm guessing that could potentially have quite a derogatory impact on the child, the family, the child's education.
Yes, and children will often cope. They'll manage. And often these are bright children who shouldn't be coping, who shouldn't just be holding on, using all of their strategies. And I'll often say to children, are you exhausted by the end of the day? And they say, oh, yes, I am. And I'll say, well, that's perfectly normal, because your brain's working so hard to keep up with all of your friends. By the end of the day, you're shattered, aren't you? And they start learning a bit more about themselves during the whole assessment process, which is really important. We talk a lot about metacognition, understanding yourself. And that can be hard as a child, but they start to understand themselves. Adults do understand themselves, obviously, and they understand the ways to hide their difficulties. And again, that's incredibly hard work as well, isn't it?
It is. How important then, staying on children for now, we'll come to adults in a moment if that's okay. How important, in your opinion, then, is that label of dyslexia? Is it a sigh of relief from a child, or does it unleash a whole lot of other fears and anxieties?
I think often for the child, it's not as important as it is for the parents, because it's an understanding of finally someone's understood how my child is, how my child learns, and so that label is important then. Sometimes it's not important at all. Many dyslexic people don't get that label at all. The assessments are not easily, they're not accessible to parents. Local authority educational psychologists who will do the free assessments are as rare as hen's teeth, so you can't find them. And there's still this sort of these myths about dyslexia that still exist, aren't there? That, oh, it doesn't really exist, or that child's just putting it on, or that child can read, so can't be dyslexic, can he? So there's lots of myths around about dyslexia still.
Yeah. Again, very derogatory, I think. If your lived experience as a child is one way, but like you say, you're surrounded by teachers, maybe even members of your family who are in denial about who you really are and so on.
Yeah.
I'm wondering then, in this very patchy provision that we've got here, whether you feel that somebody like you, your role is to come in and be a great advocate then for children's voices in that way. Is that also part of the assessment process? It's not just about ascertaining whether dyslexia is there or not.
I hope so. And I think also I'm there to signpost on to additional services. And I think the recommendations are really important in that respect. So I might, a child may come in and I observe that they've got tracking difficulties or the print's jumping around. And so that the parents haven't picked up about that. They always have to have a hearing test before, a hearing and eyesight test before the assessment. That might bring up things. I may observe that the child has got attention difficulties, may then suggest further referral through the GP or the CAMS mental health, to test that maybe. So it's what happens after sometimes that is really important.
And it's good to hear that you've got really that holistic approach, looking at the whole child in front of you, all aspects. And, I'm so pleased to hear you mention the after journey. So again, what's your role in that? So you've took this child and their family and sometimes the teachers, I guess, on this journey.
Yeah.
You've got to this point where, yes, dyslexia is there. What else do you do before you, kind of say goodbye, if you like, and let them go on with their education and so on?
Well, I mean, the reports are very wordy. They're very technical as well. So I will go through the report with a parent. I'll go through the report with the school. Not as much as I would anticipate. I don't get so many schools, so many parents coming back to me asking me to explain things, which I'm always surprised about. And I know from my own son, where I recently picked up his report when he was eventually diagnosed, I'd only looked at what the diagnosis was. I hadn't looked further, and I'd missed all of the recommendations for my son as well. So I think parents they just want to see, are they dyslexic? Are they not? And then they may then put the report away for quite a few years. If they pick it up in the future, that report can actually be used all the way through, right the way through to university, actually. So sometimes there will be things that would help the child at various different stages in the report as well. So, I think it is something that can be used for a long time, that report, dipping into it and seeing whether or not there's a good recommendation that would help when that child goes from primary to secondary, for example, or from secondary on to university. So, hopefully they do provide as you say, that holistic view of the child that will last them for a few years.
Yeah, which is so important when we are looking at well-being and mental health and so on, isn't it? Yeah. So therefore then, on the back of what you've explained, and you've done that brilliantly, thanks so much, what's the impact of COVID on all this? We've just come through a pandemic, still trying to figure out how we live in the new normal, as we call it. What's been the journey and the impact of the pandemic on that assessment journey?
I mean, obviously we know all of the terrible stories, all of the bad stories. We know how far behind children are. But I have also heard some good stories as well. I've assessed, I think, 3 children where they actually enjoyed lockdown. And I remember one of the girls saying to me, it was wonderful because she was really good at crafts and making things. And she said, I got all my work done in the morning, and then I could spend all afternoon doing the things that I wanted to do. And she really flourished in that environment where she control what she was doing and finish her work early and have control over the afternoon then. For others, it's been an opportunity for parents to actually watch their child, see how lacking in concentration they are, the fact that they needed to walk around the house, the fact that they procrastinated before they got down to their work. So there's lots of things that parents have found out about their children that they wouldn't have found out dropping them off at school every day. So it's been a real learning curve, hasn't it, for everybody? It has for me as an assessor. It's because all of a sudden, all of our tests went online and we were able to do online assessments, which means, in theory, I could assess somebody, and I've assessed people in Germany and America and all sorts of different places that I wouldn't have been able to do beforehand unless they came to my little office here. So, it's opened up my world in terms of assessment.
And did you guys, the assessors, for you guys as a professional group, did you have a backlog? I know you said you kind of went virtual.
Yeah.
Were you able to keep up with demand? Or, like you say, Katrina, because you've got parents who've been at home educating, suddenly see these things in their children, has that now, prompted a tidal wave of requests for assessments?
Yes. I mean, we've been inundated. Schools can't cope because they can't get these children seen by psychologists as quickly as they can. So most of us got really long waiting lists, sadly.
Yeah, which is really a shame. So therefore, I guess bringing this full circle when we're talking about children, if we've got these kids waiting for an assessment, and we've said earlier that getting an assessment is a good thing for your mental well-being and so on, then what are we saying about children who are waiting on those long waiting lists where their needs aren't being met?
A lot of the times I've said to parents and I've said to schools, have one of the commercial screeners, do one of the commercial screeners like Nessie. And Nessie is quick, cheap, and it's a lovely little thing that the children love doing. It does give a little written report, and it's something to be able to see strengths and challenges, which is really important because that's what we want to see. We want to see the things that the child's good at, as well as the things that they can't do so well. So for some parents, I think that's a really good use of their money. Take the report into school, and then see if the school could start putting together some sort of teaching program based on that. For some children that may be enough, that screener. Certainly I think it gives really good underlying difficulties anyway that can be addressed through some teaching programs. There's some really good programs out there that will support children. Again, Nessie have a very good program for children for reading, spelling, touch typing. You've got Word Shark, Number Shark. Schools need, they've got these things, they've got these resources. They need to just put these children on these programs.
Yeah, no, thanks, Katrina. That's really great heads up, because you're right. I think we shouldn't wait for the report. It's start to get action and get active now, isn't it, if we've got concerns about our children and so on. So I guess earlier on in this chat we both agreed that early identification, as early as we can and so on, is a good thing. So I'm going to bring you now into thinking about when that doesn't happen with adults. You said that you're a workplace needs assessor and so on. So our adults in the workplace who may be well into middle age and have not yet had any kind of assessment, maybe they've always suspected, never done anything about it. Maybe they may be struggling with their workloads and so on. Again, the impact of the pandemic on our working lives has been huge. So from your expertise from that angle, working with adults, as you said, you're a workplace needs assessor as well. What's the impact on this for us adults and our mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, obviously COVID, again, that had the impact, didn't it? That, many adults with dyslexia, with co-occurring difficulties, don't like change, do they? And then all of a sudden we had very quick changes, didn't we? We were suddenly shut up at home. There were communication difficulties. We had to learn how to cope with Zoom and Teams and all of these different things, and all of the protocols to go with those things. All of our meetings went online. online. We didn't see colleagues. For some people, they quite liked that, didn't they? They were so quite relieved to be at home.
Well, again, it's like what you said with the children. It's mixed, isn't it? There's a real mixed experience. That's, in some ways, I think, has that made it more difficult? Because you've got some who didn't mind it, others who've really struggled, and we're trying to navigate through.
Yeah, there's and now we've got problems with getting people back into the workplace, haven't we? So, so it has. You know, there's a myriad of different difficulties. I would say that not every dyslexic adult has to have a diagnosis. Not every dyslexic adult is in a job where they need a diagnosis or are necessarily failing in that job. They may be succeeding.
Great. I mean, great. That's a great heads up, Katrina.
Yeah.
So, do you feel though, you know, I hear what you're saying, and you're right, we don't necessarily need those diagnoses as adults, but can that have a detrimental effect if we don't get the, in quotes, the label of dyslexia? Or, you know, in your experience, you've worked with, I know, numerous professionals over the years who maybe it's not an issue.
And often it's because perhaps the school have pointed out that their child may have an issue. They've come to me for an assessment, and then they said, I've always had those problems.
Yes.
And so, you know, sometimes I then get the parent coming back for the assessment as well. So, you know, we know, don't we? It's often for adults, they've got these really good strategies, and again, they cope. They're holding on, they're okay. And then all of a sudden there's a slight shift, the job changes, they get a promotion, and those strategies aren't enough. And it's these tipping points, isn't it, that are the difficulty for adults. So they might have a professional exam they've got to suddenly study for, and they're older, they haven't studied for a while. And again, it's those strategies just aren't enough. And so they've got used to coping, and it's. I mean, recently I just did an assessment of a very, very senior banker, and you know, hugely intelligent, but again, job changed slightly, and all of a sudden he couldn't maintain, especially with COVID, all the strategies that he had in place. He had to learn new strategies, but he wasn't quick enough to suddenly encompass all the new strategies he needed to put in place.
Fascinating, isn't it? And as you say, it's obviously no link to expertise and talent and intelligence, of course. I wonder then if you'd share with us, and I know I've got a few stories myself, of the impact on adults if, in the variety of ways that you've come across it over the years, Katrina, when that you know, the diagnosis or the help is given. I think a lot of people probably presume that most of the time it's being really happy and relieved, but that's not always been something I've seen, and I'm sure you mustn't have as well.
And I do warn adults, if they've never had any kind of assessment beforehand, I do warn them that it could be quite traumatic for them to have the diagnosis later in life. And so I pre-warn them, because there is that emotional response to something, being told you're dyslexic, and all of a sudden that adult will think, well, oh, I could have been that, I could have done that. My life might have turned out completely differently if I'd known this at school. Why didn't the school pick this up? You know, my life could have been a huge success. What do I do now? So, you know, there is that emotional response to it that can be very, very difficult for them.
I know, you know, we've shared these stories before. I've worked with people over the years who've got very angry, like you said, you know, why has this happened to me? Anger with parents, you know, so they're an adult, they may be parents now, they suddenly have got angry with their parents as well, feeling very depressed. I always remember a story of somebody from a fire service here in the UK saying that a firefighter had been identified, and he walked in for like a post-assessment chat, really, like the types of journey that you spoke about after the assessment, took all his gear off, his protective gear, and just burst out crying, sitting at the desk. And, you know, it's incredibly moving and scary maybe for the person who's going through that, but also the person like yourself who's thinking, gosh, how do I guide this very, accomplished person through this quite traumatic revelation, isn't it?
I don't think adults realise how prevalent these difficulties are in the population. We're talking about up to 15% of the population having these kinds of difficulties. But the adult will feel very, very isolated. They will feel that they're the only person in the company who's got that kind of difficulty. And it's encouraging that person to talk. It's encouraging companies to be to embrace these not as difficulties for the company, but these are things that could enhance the company, and give them an edge, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot now about superpowers, don't we? So these are colleagues who offer so many talents to the organisation, isn't it? In your experience, then, do you feel, you've talked about people speaking up and so on, peer support groups, having an ally in your organisation that you can see, okay, this colleague's here, they've talked about their dyslexia, I don't feel so isolated.
No. And I think, we've seen that, haven't we, where the person in charge, the superintendent in a police force, has said that they're dyslexic, and that has rippled through the organisation and really been a positive, very, very positive for everybody, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's really interesting, because what I'm picking up from what you're saying is, I think you've said for most children, happily, they're very resilient, even though, we are going through tough times because of the pandemic, and kind of take it in their stride. Ironically, maybe in some ways, adults maybe sometimes less so. Actually, the identification is going to, for some of them, really impact, and not always in a positive way.
No, and it's often a very sort of thin veneer of resilience, isn't it?
Yes, actually, yeah.
Knocked. Again, in the assessments, I will always ask questions like, how are you sleeping? And ask those questions, because then I would always make sure that they go and see a GP if they haven't been sleeping, if they're experiencing stress. Because sometimes they're just coping, aren't they? And they haven't realised the effects of what's happening in the workplace to them.
And is that what you do then, Katrina? So if you are concerned with an adult that there is some sort of mental health issue there, and it could be unfortunately, the identification has opened up in them past trauma and past hurt and so on, and maybe this resentment and anger often. What do you do then as a responsible assessor to guide that person through if they're in a workplace and so on?
Well, I think a lot of the times when I've gone in and done a workplace needs assessment and talked to the line manager, it's often a training opportunity, because the line manager won't know about dyslexia. So it's spending that time with the line manager, maybe with the head of HR, occupational health, really sort of talking about the impact of dyslexia for that individual, but maybe sort of widening it up as well, and sort of talking more generally, so that they start thinking, that reminds me of X, perhaps that's the root of their difficulties, or and trying to widen it out as much as possible, so that they're more aware as a company about their employees. We know how difficult it is to recruit good people, retain good people. These are opportunities for retention of really good staff who've got different ways of thinking, different ways of coming up with answers to problems. That companies need, don't they? They need that expertise, and for people, and I've come across them where they've handed in their notice rather than cope within a job that they feel that they can't succeed in. It's such a waste, isn't it?
It is. It's tragic, and for things really that we would hope are very achievable and fixable, if that's the word, in terms of doing right by people. I know we've both worked with organisations over the years who talk about doing right by their colleagues, and when that sentiment's there, it's so positive, isn't it? I loved what you'd said there about this just shows you in your role as the dyslexia assessor, and whether it's workplace needs and so on, your obligations, I guess, transcends dyslexia, where you might be signposting to a GP or highlighting, to contact a charity like Mind, or maybe, I don't know, even the Samaritans and things like that over the years.
I mean, the other thing that to talk about the fact is that if I get commissioned to do a report, there are 2 reports that go out. One report is the full report that goes out to the person who's I'm assessing, but the employer will only get a summary report. So the employee doesn't then think, oh no, they're going to find out my IQ, they're going to find out that I'm not so good in that particular area. They don't get that information. They never get that information. So that's all confidential. So if I did want to put something in about, going to the Samaritans or something, the employer wouldn't necessarily find out any of that information if it was confidential. So
that's brilliant, and I think very reassuring for people who are scared as well.
Yes.
There's a fear factor here for adults as well. I know for children as well, but especially for adults, in times when people are worried about job security and so on. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's really scary to think my manager's going to read everything that I've spoke to Katrina about. But obviously, you say that that's not the case, which is brilliant.
Yes.
So if people are listening to this, Katrina, and it resonates with them, and it's almost a trigger for them, either about their children or themselves as adults. And like you say, sometimes it's for their kids and for themselves as parents. They see themselves in their children as well. What do we do? I mean, because we're at mental health campaign at the moment here at Succeed, we are, signposting to lots of organisations around that side of wellbeing. But regarding wanting to find out more about dyslexia, if you've got concerns about your kids or yourself, where can people go to find out more?
Well, I think go on to the websites of the various different charities. They've always got lots of information on there. If people have got difficulties with reading, there are immersive readers that will read back the information from the website as well. I'm a trustee of a charity called the Adult Dyslexia Centre, and they have a helpline, they have an information centre, they do screenings, and very importantly, they have an adult support group.
Brilliant.
And then with COVID, this was only meeting face to face in the local pub, I think. But with COVID, this extended. Now there's people coming in from Ireland and all over the world and
actually.
But they meet by Zoom. They have speakers talking about things like mental health problems, and they just help each other. And I think that's really important, that you get over that stigma of feeling you're on your own and you're the only person with dyslexia. So I think that's a really great thing. There's organisations like Groups, which has got 3 O's in the middle of it. Which,
yes, and we've talked to Penny Aston. Yes. Darren, our CEO, talked to Penny. So yes, their work is brilliant. And we've also spoken to Joe, who does walking therapy. So this is a part of our work here at Succeed with Dyslexia. We are looking and speaking to real experts like yourself. It's great to hear actually that you guys all refer to each other, because it's a real, kind of cooperative approach, I suppose, is the way to put it around these issues. Because I love what you said about, a dyslexia network and being able to join virtually. And we both know that here in the UK, there's local dyslexia associations who can provide helpline and so on for either you if you're worried about your kids, or for you yourself as well, to find out more. And then people can get in touch with people like yourselves, I guess, as well, Katrina.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is there are sometimes very small adjustments for an adult that can be made that make a huge impact, really positive, don't cost the organisation very much, that are really, really helpful. And there's things like access to work support, which is free, and the government will pay for lots of different things. So there's lots out there. There's more out there than there ever was. For children, if you've got any concerns about your child, go and speak to your child's SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. And in other countries, there will be somebody similar who administers special needs within that your school. And have that dialogue with them, and in a very calm way. And so, because it's very, for parents, it's incredibly emotional for parents, isn't it, when they see their child not meeting their potential. So
it is. It's real. This issue has so many layers to it, I think, for lots of different reasons. I love what you'd said about, keep talking. I think the message is about understand this issue, get yourself educated as much as you can. Like you said, realise, I loved what you said earlier, you're not on your own. And keep talking, really, and reach out to experts like yourself. Or, there's lots of information online and so on, isn't there?
Yes. Yes, and I think also for parents is don't expect overnight improvement either. It takes time as well. So let the schools try and put things in place, monitor your child, and then see how things are going.
Because I'm guessing, Katrina, as a parent, and we all worry all the time about our kids. Your anxiety around your child's dyslexia and other differences is just going to pass on to your child, isn't it?
Well, particularly if you feel that your difficulties weren't picked up at school and you're determined your child is not going to have the bad experience of school that you had. So you can understand it, can't you?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, thank you so much. We've covered so much in that time. It's been so informative. I really mean that, because you've took us right the way through from children through to adults. And it's been really interesting to hear, you've made me think about the difference around the response to the word dyslexia, the identification of dyslexia. It's fascinating to hear in some ways how children in this area may be more resilient at times than adults, isn't it?
Yeah, but it comes down to seeing where they are and working with them, and for the child to understand what strategies they can put in place to help themselves, and what things perhaps a specialist teacher needs to work with that child to really help them long term as well. Yeah. And parents, there's lots of parents can do at home also.
Yeah, brilliant. Katrina, thank you so much. This is a really important conversation to have. And I know here in the UK, we are talking a lot about assessment and identification with the changes with special educational needs and so on. I think we all understand, no matter where we are in the world, that knowing yourself, really knowing who you are, is a vital ingredient to having a great sense of well-being and for your own mental health as well, isn't it?
But understanding things that you're good at as well.
Yes,
that's really
definitely.
important.
Yes. Yeah, brilliant. Katrina, thank you so much. It's been, as always, a complete delight. And yeah, we'll just keep talking about this because it's a really important subject. So thank you from us here at Succeed with Dyslexia.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this interview. Throughout the month of May, we've had the awesome opportunity to speak to some incredible people with a focus on the relationship between mental health and dyslexia. Please feel free to click this link here and learn more about Margaret Rook, as she talks about her own experience as an author and some of the things that she's learned in conjunction with mental health and dyslexia. If you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching.